Black Maid's daughter inherited Ailing Billionaire's $200 million. He was her father all along. She cleaned their mansions for 30 years, keeping his secret until her dying breath. Now her daughter, a fierce civil rights attorney, just inherited $200 million from the billionaire she never knew was her father. But the real shock, the explosive truth hidden in her mother's final letter, is about to shake America's richest family to its core. This is just the beginning of our most gripping family saga yet. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications bell to catch part 2 tomorrow, where we reveal the shocking contents of that final letter, and the twin secret that will change everything. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. The mahogany conference table reflected Rachel Campbell's stunned face like dark water, multiplying her disbelief into a dozen fractured images. She sat alone in the vast boardroom of Whitfield & Associates, her fingers trembling against the leather portfolio that held documents she couldn't quite comprehend. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan stretched endlessly beneath gray October clouds, indifferent to the fact that her entire world had just shifted on its axis. "Ms. Campbell, I understand this must be overwhelming." The elderly lawyer, Harrison Blackstone, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses with practiced precision. His voice carried the weight of 40 years in estate law, yet even he seemed unsettled by what he was about to reveal. "But I assure you, everything in these documents has been verified multiple times. Theodore Whitfield left very specific instructions." Rachel's throat felt like sandpaper. "There must be some mistake. I didn't even know Theodore Whitfield. My mother worked for wealthy families, yes, but she never mentioned." Her voice trailed off as she thought of Ruth Campbell, buried 2 years ago in a modest cemetery in Queens, surrounded by friends from their neighborhood, not billionaires in Armani suits. The conference room smelled of old leather and expensive cologne, a world so far removed from the cramped apartment where Rachel had grown up, watching her mother come home exhausted from cleaning other people's homes. Ruth had insisted Rachel focus on her education, sacrificing everything so her daughter could become the civil rights attorney now sitting in this impossible moment. "Your mother never told you about her time in the Whitfield household?" Blackstone's question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Rachel shook her head slowly. "She said my father died before I was born. A construction accident. She had one photograph, blurry, barely visible. I stopped asking questions years ago because they made her cry." What would make you cry if you discovered a truth your mother spent her whole life hiding from you? Leave a comment below about family secrets that changed everything. Blackstone opened his own portfolio, extracting a sealed envelope with Rachel's name written in shaking handwriting. "Mr. Whitfield left this for you. He insisted it be delivered personally, along with the inheritance. $200 million. Rachel spoke the number aloud for the first time, and it sounded absurd, like reading from a fairy tale to a child. "Why would a stranger leave me $200 million? I'm afraid Theodore Whitfield wasn't a stranger, Ms. Campbell." Blackstone's professional composure cracked slightly, revealing something almost like sympathy. "He spent the last 3 years of his life watching you from afar. He attended your lectures on social justice. He read every article you published about defending the underprivileged. He even," the lawyer paused, consulting his notes, "he even made anonymous donations to every legal aid organization you worked with." The room seemed to tilt. Rachel gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white against the dark wood. "That's not possible. Why would he?" "Perhaps the letter will explain." Blackstone stood, his joints protesting with small pops that echoed in the vast space. "Mr. Whitfield died 6 days ago. The cancer had spread everywhere by the end. But he made sure everything was in order for you." He moved toward the door, then paused. "There's one more thing. Mr. Whitfield owned a storage unit in Brooklyn. He left instructions that you should visit it after reading the letter. The key is in the envelope." Alone now, Rachel stared at the envelope. Her name seemed to pulse on the cream-colored paper, written by a dying man she'd never met. Or had she? Somewhere in the maze of her childhood memories, was there a face she'd forgotten? A presence she'd dismissed? She thought of her mother's hands, always slightly swollen from years of manual labor, and how they'd trembled whenever Rachel asked about her father. The quick change of subject. The forced smile. The story that never quite made sense, a construction worker who left no insurance, no family, no trace except a daughter he'd never seen. The letter felt heavy as she lifted it, as if it contained more than just paper and ink. Through the windows, the city hummed with its usual chaos, but inside this boardroom, time seemed suspended. Rachel Campbell, defender of the forgotten and voice for the voiceless, was about to discover that her own story had been the biggest mystery of all. Her fingers found the edge of the seal. One pull, and everything she believed about herself, about her mother, about the very foundation of her existence, would change forever. The wax broke with a small crack that sounded like thunder in the silence. The letter trembled in Rachel's hands as she read Theodore Whitfield's dying confession, each word cutting deeper than the last. My dear Rachel, by the time you read this, I will have paid the only price that matters for my cowardice, dying without ever hearing you call me father. I have watched you for 3 years, a ghost haunting the edges of your extraordinary life, and I have seen what you became without me. Perhaps because of my absence. You are everything I never had the courage to be. Rachel's vision blurred. She set the letter down, unable to continue, and stood to pace the boardroom. Her reflection in the windows showed a woman she recognized, 35 years old, professional blazer over a simple blouse, the same determined jaw her mother had always said came from her father's side. But which father? The fictional construction worker, or this billionaire who had abandoned them? Her phone buzzed. David's name appeared on the screen, her law partner and the closest thing she had to family since her mother's death. She let it go to voicemail. How could she explain this to anyone when she couldn't understand it herself? The letter drew her back. Your mother, Ruth Campbell, was the only person who ever saw through my armor to the frightened orphan boy beneath. I was 35, your age now, when she came to work in my household. She had a dignity that made my wealth seem like poverty. For 3 months, we found in each other something neither expected. Not the sordid affair you might imagine, but genuine love, the kind that terrifies men like me because it demands truth. When she told me about you, I stood at the crossroads of my life. I was engaged to Victoria Ashford, a merger disguised as marriage. My board of directors, my social circle, my entire world operated on the assumption that people like your mother existed to serve people like me, never to stand as equals. I chose the coward's path. I gave her money and demanded silence. I terminated her employment and what we had. She took the money, for you, I learned later, always for you, and disappeared. Rachel sank back into the chair. She thought of her mother's sacrifices, the double shifts, the night classes she'd attended to get her GED, the way she'd light up when Rachel brought home good grades. Ruth Campbell had built her daughter's future on a foundation of silence and determination. A knock interrupted her thoughts. A young woman entered, late 20s, professional but warm, with kind eyes behind designer glasses. Ms. Campbell? I'm Sophia Chen, Mr. Whitfield's personal assistant for the last 5 years. Her voice carried a slight tremor. He asked me to give you this after you'd read the letter. She handed Rachel a leather journal, worn at the edges. Rachel opened it to find pages of handwriting, different from the letter, stronger, more confident. The dates went back 3 years. March 15th, attended RC's lecture at Columbia. She has her mother's grace but transformed into power. When she spoke about justice for the maintenance worker wrongfully terminated, did she know she was defending someone like her mother? The irony burns. June 2nd, RC won the Morrison case. $2 million settlement for the factory workers. She refused to take more than her standard fee. Where does such integrity come from? Not from me, certainly. He wrote about you constantly, Sophia said softly. In the end, when the morphine made him confused, he would call out for Ruth and Rachel. The nurses thought he was delirious, but I knew. Rachel looked up at this young woman who had spent 5 years with the stranger who was her father. What was he like? Sophia considered the question. Brilliant, ruthless in business. But in his last years, haunted. He donated hundreds of millions anonymously. He visited your mother's grave every month with fresh gardenias. Gardenias. Rachel's breath caught. My mother loved gardenias. She could never afford them, but sometimes she'd stop at the expensive florist just to smell them. "He knew," Sophia said simply. "He knew everything about both of you. Your first case, your law school graduation, the time you spent your entire savings to keep the community center open. He had investigators, yes, but more than that, he cared. I think watching you become who you are was his only joy." Rachel returned to the letter, needing to know the rest. "I spent 43 years as a dead man walking, accumulating wealth that meant nothing, building an empire on the grave of my conscience. Your mother passed 2 years ago, and I stood at her funeral like the ghost I'd become, watching you grieve with a community who loved her truly." The preacher spoke of Ruth's refusal to let bitterness take root despite life's hardships. "She never told you about me, a final kindness to us both. The money I leave you is inadequate compensation for a lifetime of absence. But I know you, Rachel. I've watched you transform every resource into justice for others. This wealth was built on moral compromise. Perhaps you can transform it into something worthy. The storage unit in Brooklyn contains things your mother left in my house. Photographs, letters she wrote but never sent, the truth she protected you from. Go there when you're ready. Or never. The choice, like all choices I denied myself, is yours. I do not ask for forgiveness. I ask only that you know this. You were loved by both your parents, even if one of them loved you too late and from too far away. Your father, Theodore Whitfield." Rachel folded the letter carefully, her hand steady now despite the tears. She thought of the man she'd built her life in opposition to, the absent father, the privileged classes who exploited workers like her mother. The irony was razor-sharp. She had become a warrior against the very world that had created her. "There's something else," Sophia said hesitantly. "Mr. Whitfield had a son with his wife Victoria. Alexander. He's nothing like his father, or rather, he's everything Mr. Whitfield wished he could have been. He's requested to meet you." Rachel felt the ground shift again. A brother. Family she never knew existed. "He doesn't want the money," Sophia added quickly. "Alexander has his own wealth. But he said he'd like to know the sister his father spoke about in his final days." Through the windows, the city lights were beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Rachel Campbell had walked into this building as one person and would leave as another. The daughter of Ruth Campbell, the maid who had preserved her dignity against all odds. And the daughter of Theodore Whitfield, the billionaire who had discovered too late that all his wealth couldn't purchase redemption. But perhaps redemption could be inherited, transformed, and finally made real through the choices of the next generation. What would you do if you discovered a sibling you never knew existed? Share your thoughts below on how you'd handle such a life-changing revelation. The Brooklyn storage facility loomed before Rachel like a fortress of corrugated metal and fading paint. Unit 247, the number burned into her memory from Theodore's letter, waited somewhere in this maze. She delayed coming here for 3 days, buried in work at the law firm while pretending her world hadn't been appended. David's voice echoed in her mind from their conversation yesterday. "Take the time you need, Rach. The Morrison case can wait. This is your life we're talking about." She found the unit tucked away in a corner, rust creeping along its edges. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease, as if it had been recently used. The metal door groaned upward, revealing a space that smelled of old paper and forgotten memories. "I hoped I'd find you here." Rachel spun around. A man stood in the corridor, tall, well-dressed but not ostentatious, with kind eyes that reminded her jarringly of the face she'd seen in Theodore's photographs. "Alexander Whitfield. How did you?" "Sophia told me you'd picked up the key." He stayed where he was, hands in his pockets, maintaining a respectful distance. "I've known about this place for months. Father made me promise not to come until you did." Rachel's legal training kicked in, analyzing his body language, his tone, searching for deception or ulterior motives. She found none. Just a man who looked as lost as she felt. "I don't know what to call you," she admitted. "Alex works." A small smile softened his features. Though long-lost brother who's equally blindsided by this whole situation, is technically accurate. Despite herself, Rachel felt an answering smile tug at her lips. "Did you know? Before he died." He told me 3 months ago, when the cancer reached his brain. I think he was afraid of dying with this secret. Alex moved closer, studying her face. You have his jawline. And Mother's, I mean Ruth's, eyes. I saw her picture in his study. Rachel turned back to the storage unit, needing a moment to compose herself. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, each labeled in her mother's neat handwriting. Letters. Photos. Rachel, age 3 to 7. And one, separate from the others, for Theodore. May I? Alex gestured to the unit. At Rachel's nod, he stepped inside. I never understood him, you know. He was distant, successful at everything except being a father. Now I know he was carrying this weight all those years. Rachel reached for the box marked Photos, her hands trembling slightly. Inside, she found carefully preserved albums, loose photographs, and a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. The top photograph showed her mother, young, beautiful, wearing a simple uniform, standing in what must have been the Whitfield mansion's kitchen. She was laughing at something off camera, her face lit with joy. That's Father's handwriting, Alex said softly, pointing to the back of the photo where a date and location were written in familiar script. Rachel set the photo aside and opened one of the letters. Her mother's handwriting filled the pages. My dearest Theodore, our daughter took her first steps today. She has your determination. Fell down 6 times but kept getting up until she could cross the whole room. I know we agreed never to contact each other, but in moments like these, I wish. The letter trailed off, unfinished, unsent. Rachel found herself sinking to the concrete floor, the weight of decades of silence suddenly unbearable. Alex sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. There's something else you should know, he said after a moment. Father left instructions about the company. The majority shares, they're yours if you want them. He said you'd know better than anyone how to transform Whitfield and Associates into a force for good. Rachel looked up sharply. What about you? You're his son, his heir. I'm a marine biologist, Alex interrupted with a slight laugh. I study coral reefs in the Pacific. The only reason I wear suits like this is for board meetings I'd rather skip. Father knew that. He also knew that you're the one who could take his legacy and make it mean something. Before Rachel could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from David. Emergency at the Morrison case. Defense trying to throw out key evidence. Need you. She started to rise, but Alex's hand on her arm stopped her. Wait. There's one more thing. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. Father had this in his desk. It's your mother's last letter to him. Written just before she died. He never opened it. Rachel stared at the sealed envelope, her mother's final words to the man who had shaped both their lives through his absence. I can't. Not yet. Keep it, Alex said gently. Along with everything else here. When you're ready. He stood, brushing dust from his pants. I have to fly back to our research station tomorrow, but I'd like to know my sister. If you're willing. Rachel looked up at him, this stranger who shared her blood, who carried none of the anger she'd expected to feel toward Theodore's real family. In his face, she saw the same lost child she'd been, searching for answers in the silence between parents. Have dinner with me, she found herself saying. Tonight. I want to hear about your coral reefs. And I have 35 years of sister stories to catch up on. Alex's smile was like watching a weight lift. I'd like that. As they walked out of the storage facility together, Rachel felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps understanding. Her phone buzzed again with David's urgent messages, and she realized that life wouldn't pause for her to process these revelations. The Morrison case needed her. Her clients needed her. And now, somehow, she had a brother who needed her too. The letter from her mother sat heavy in her bag, waiting. But for the first time since Harrison Blackstone had called her into that boardroom, Rachel felt steady. She was Ruth Campbell's daughter, strong enough to face whatever truths lay ahead. And she was Theodore Whitfield's daughter, ready to take his empire and reshape it into something worthy of her mother's sacrifice. You know, Alex said as they reached their cars, Father once told me his biggest regret wasn't the money or the missed opportunities. It was never hearing you call him Dad. He paused. I think he'd be proud to hear you call me brother. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes, but her voice was firm. Let's start with dinner, Alex. The rest we'll figure out together. 2 weeks after meeting Alex, Rachel sat in her office at Campbell and Martinez Legal Services, surrounded by documents that told two very different stories. On her left, the Morrison case files, hundreds of pages detailing workplace discrimination against immigrant janitors. On her right, the Whitfield and Associates corporate records, a labyrinth of acquisitions, mergers, and decisions that had built her father's empire. Her phone lit up with a text from Alex, coral bleaching worse than expected. Might need that corporate influence sooner than we thought. Call when you can. Before she could respond, David Martinez appeared in her doorway, his usually immaculate tie loosened, dark circles under his eyes. The Morrison defense team just dropped a bomb. Whitfield Properties owns half the buildings where our plaintiffs worked. Rachel felt the room tilt. What? I've spent 3 days tracing the shell companies. David dropped a thick folder on her desk. Your father's company is our opposition's biggest client. They're trying to force arbitration, bury the whole case in paperwork. The irony was almost too perfect. Rachel had spent 15 years fighting corporate giants, only to discover she was heir to one of the largest. She picked up the folder, her mother's voice echoing in her memory. Sometimes, baby, justice takes the long way home. There's more, David continued, running a hand through his graying hair. Someone leaked your connection to Theodore Whitfield. Twitter's exploding. Social justice warrior revealed as secret billionaire. The Morrison plaintiffs are concerned. Rachel opened her laptop, and her heart sank. The headlines were everywhere. Civil rights attorney's secret inheritance raises questions. Whitfield heiress led cases against father's empire. Trust fund justice. The Rachel Campbell story. Her phone buzzed again. Sophia this time. Board meeting tomorrow. They're voting on the new CEO. Alexander told them you might want a say in this. Rachel closed her eyes, remembering the storage unit. She'd gone back twice more, reading through her mother's unsent letters. Each one revealed a woman who had chosen dignity over bitterness, who had built a life of meaning from the ashes of broken dreams. What would Ruth Campbell say now, seeing her daughter caught between two worlds? We need to talk about the firm, David said quietly. He'd been more than a partner for the past decade. He was the brother she'd had before discovering Alex, the one who'd held her hand at her mother's funeral. If you take control of Whitfield and Associates, we'll lose half our clients. They won't trust us. And if I don't... Rachel met his gaze. That company employs thousands. Its policies affect millions. Maybe this is where I'm supposed to be. Like your father? The word stung, but David's tone held no judgment, only concern. Rachel opened her desk drawer and pulled out her mother's final letter to Theodore, still sealed. She'd carried it for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. My mother taught me that change comes from within or without, but it has to come from somewhere. She turned the envelope over in her hands. Maybe this isn't about choosing sides. Maybe it's about building bridges. David sat heavily in the chair across from her. The Morrison plaintiffs need an answer by tomorrow. If we lose this case, we won't. Rachel straightened, decision crystallizing. Call them in. All of them. I want to tell them the truth myself. About Mother, about Theodore, about everything. And the board meeting? Rachel reached for her phone to text Alex. I'll be there. But first, I need to read something. Can you meet tonight? His response came quickly. My hotel. 8 p.m. Bringing takeout and tissues. Sisters who inherit billion-dollar companies need both. She smiled despite herself, then looked at David. I'm not choosing between our work and Whitfield and Associates. I'm choosing both. Those janitors deserve justice, and that company deserves a conscience. I just have to figure out how to be Rachel Campbell and Rachel Whitfield at the same time. David's expression softened. You sound like your mother. Which one? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Ruth, he said firmly. Always Ruth. After David left, Rachel sat alone in her darkening office. The city lights began to twinkle outside her window, so different from the view in that Whitfield boardroom, but somehow the same. Somewhere out there, two graves held two parents who had loved her in their own imperfect ways. She picked up her mother's final letter again. Tonight, with her newfound brother beside her, she would finally read it. Tomorrow, she would face the Morrison plaintiffs and tell them a story about a maid's daughter who became a billionaire's heir. Then she would walk into that board meeting and show them what justice looked like when it came home the long way. But first, she had one stop to make. The florist was closing when she arrived, but the owner recognized her, one of her pro bono clients from years ago. Ms. Campbell, I was just reading about you online. I need gardenias, Rachel said softly. 2 bouquets. One for her mother's grave, one for Theodore's. Because bridges had to start somewhere, and sometimes they started with flowers and sealed letters and the courage to be both the person you were raised to be and the person you were born to become. Her phone buzzed one last time. A message from an unknown number. Ms. Whitfield, the board is expecting you to fail tomorrow. Thought you should know. A friend. Rachel smiled, thinking of all the people who had underestimated her mother. They were about to learn that determination ran in both sides of her family. What secrets would you find hardest to forgive? Share your thoughts below on whether some truths are better left buried. The hotel suite's elegant furnishings blurred through Rachel's tears as she read the last lines of her mother's final letter to Theodore. Alex sat beside her, one hand resting supportively on her shoulder, his own dinner forgotten. My dearest Theodore, the doctors say I have weeks, maybe days. Our daughter has become everything I dreamed and more. But there's something you need to know, something I've carried for 35 years. I lied to you that day. When you offered me the money, when you said it would be better for everyone if I disappeared. I told you I would consider terminating the pregnancy. That lie bought me time to leave, to protect our child from a world that would have seen her as a scandal. But that's not the whole truth. Rachel wasn't our only child, Theodore. There were twins. Rachel's hands shook so violently that Alex had to catch the letter before it fell. There's more, he said gently. The boy was stillborn. I named him Theodore, after you. He's buried in St. Michael's Cemetery, under my family name. I visit him every year on their birthday. Sometimes, watching Rachel grow, I would see glimpses of what her brother might have been. I don't tell you this for forgiveness or to cause you pain. I tell you because no parent should die with secrets about their children. Rachel deserves to know she had a twin. Just as she deserves to know that her father, despite his choices, gave her the strength I see in her every day. With love, despite everything. Ruth. The silence in the room felt thick enough to touch. Rachel stood abruptly, moving to the window. Below, Manhattan's lights sparkled like fallen stars, indifferent to the earthquakes happening in human hearts. A brother, she whispered. I had a brother. You have a brother, Alex said quietly, coming to stand beside her. A different one than you might have had, but still. Rachel turned to him, seeing Theodore's jawline, Ruth's compassionate eyes, the strange genetic lottery that had given her 2 brothers, one lost before birth, one found after death. Did he know? Theodore. Father, did he read this? The envelope was sealed when I found it, Alex replied. But. He hesitated, then went to his briefcase. I found this in his personal safe. I was waiting for the right moment to show you. He handed her a yellowed newspaper clipping from 35 years ago. The headline was small, buried in the back pages. Infant laid to rest at St. Michael's, Campbell family mourns. Below was a tiny photograph of a much younger Ruth, standing alone at a small grave. He knew, Rachel breathed. He must have had her followed, found out somehow. But he never told anyone, never acknowledged. The dates match, Alex said softly. Every year on your birthday, Father would disappear for hours. His secretary, before Sophia, used to complain about the blocked-off time. No meetings, no calls. Rachel sank into a chair, memories rearranging themselves like pieces of a broken kaleidoscope. Mother always insisted on 2 birthday cakes. I thought it was just her being extra celebratory, but she was remembering. Both of us. Her phone buzzed. Another message about tomorrow's board meeting. The Morrison case plaintiffs were gathering at 9 a.m. The board would convene at 11. The world kept spinning, demanding decisions, even as the past cracked open beneath her feet. "I need to go to St. Michael's," she said suddenly. "Tonight. Now." Alex already had his car keys in hand. "I'll drive." The cemetery was technically closed, but the elderly groundskeeper recognized Rachel from her mother's funeral. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Alex, the resemblance to Theodore's newspaper photos unmistakable, but he let them in without comment. Under a waxing moon, Rachel stood before a tiny headstone she'd passed 100 times without knowing. Theodore Campbell Jr., beloved son, brother, angel. The dates matched her own birthday. She placed her hand on the cold stone, feeling the weight of 35 years of unspoken grief. Her mother had carried this burden alone, visiting this grave while raising her surviving child to be strong, to fight injustice, to believe in the possibility of a better world. "The board meeting tomorrow," she said without looking at Alex. "What am I walking into?" "A war," he answered honestly. "Victoria, my mother, she's gathered allies. They're scared of what you represent. Change. Accountability. The past coming back to demand answers." Rachel straightened, something crystallizing in her heart. "Good. Good." Alex sounded surprised. "Mother raised me to fight impossible battles. Father built an empire that needs redemption. And somewhere between their choices and their secrets, I became exactly who I needed to be for tomorrow." She touched the headstone one last time. "For all of us." Her phone lit up again. David, with an update on the Morrison case. But this time, the competing demands of her 2 worlds didn't feel like a contradiction. They felt like a convergence. "Alex." She turned to her living brother, the moon casting shadows that made him look eerily like their father. "I need you to help me with something before tomorrow. It's time to show the board exactly what kind of Whitfield they're dealing with." Because Rachel Campbell had spent her life fighting for justice from the outside. But Rachel Whitfield Campbell, daughter of a maid and a billionaire, sister to a lost twin and a found ally, heir to both struggle and privilege, she could fight from anywhere. And tomorrow, the fight would begin. The Morrison case plaintiffs filled every chair in Rachel's conference room, their faces a mix of betrayal and uncertainty. Maria Suarez, their lead representative, sat directly across from Rachel, her cleaning uniform still on from the night shift. "You're telling us," Maria said slowly, "that your father's company owns the buildings where we were exploited? That you're about to become CEO of the same corporation we're fighting?" Rachel met her gaze steadily. "Yes, but—" "There is no but," Maria interrupted, standing abruptly. "We trusted you, Ms. Campbell. Or should I say, Ms. Whitfield?" David stepped forward from his position by the wall, but Rachel raised a hand to stop him. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the conference table where she'd spent countless hours fighting for people like Maria. "My mother," Rachel said quietly, "worked as a maid for 30 years. The night she went into labor with me, she was cleaning offices in a building not unlike the ones you work in. No breaks, no health care, no dignity." She pulled out a photograph from the storage unit, Ruth in her uniform. This was her life. And yes, Theodore Whitfield was my father, but Ruth Campbell was my mother, and her story, her struggle, that's my truth too. Maria's expression softened slightly, but her words remained firm. "Pretty words don't change the fact that you're one of them now." "No," Rachel agreed. "Actions change facts. Which is why, in exactly," she checked her watch, 43 minutes, "I'm walking into the Whitfield and Associates board meeting with a proposal. Full health care for all building maintenance staff. Living wages. Educational benefits for workers' children. And a seat on the board for a workers' representative." The room erupted in murmurs. Maria sank back into her chair. "They'll never agree," someone called out. Rachel smiled grimly. "Then I'll take my controlling shares," my inheritance, and my mother's determination, and I'll make them agree. Or I'll dismantle the company piece by piece until they do." Her phone buzzed. "Alex. Victoria's here early. Brought lawyers. It's worse than we thought." Rachel's heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm asking you to trust me for 48 more hours. If I can't deliver what I'm promising, David will take the case forward without me. You'll lose nothing. Except time," Maria pointed out. "My mother waited 35 years for justice," Rachel replied. "Sometimes the longest road is the only one that leads to real change." The room fell silent. Then Maria stood again, this time extending her hand. 48 hours, Ms. Campbell Whitfield. Show us who you really are." Rachel shook her hand, trying to ignore the growing knot in her stomach. As the plaintiffs filed out, David touched her arm. "You know Victoria will fight dirty," he warned. "Theodore's ex-wife has spent decades building her influence on that board." "I know." Rachel gathered her files. "That's why I sent Alex to get something from the storage unit. Mother kept everything, David, including proof of what really happened the year before I was born." The elevator ride to the Whitfield and Associates boardroom felt like ascending to a battlefield. When the doors opened, Sophia was waiting, her face pale. "They're all here," she whispered. Victoria brought Theodore's old partner, James Harrison. "He's claiming." "Rachel, he's claiming he has evidence that your mother stole from the company. That the inheritance is based on blackmail." Rachel's steps faltered for the first time that day. James Harrison. She remembered the name from Theodore's journals. His closest friend, until something had torn them apart. The boardroom doors loomed before her. Through the glass, she could see Victoria Whitfield, elegant in expensive grief, holding court among the board members. Alex stood alone at the far end of the table, his face tight with anger. Rachel's phone lit up one last time. A message from an unknown number. "Ms. Campbell Whitfield, the evidence Mr. Harrison has is forged. I know because I helped create it. Meet me in the east stairwell. Harrison's former assistant." She had exactly 3 minutes until the meeting started. 3 minutes to decide whether to walk into that room and fight with the truth she had, or risk everything on a message that could be a trap. The weight of her mother's final letter pressed against her heart where she carried it. The twin brother she'd never known. The father who'd watched from shadows. The mother who'd chosen dignity over ease. All of their choices had led to this moment. "Rachel." Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. "They're ready for you." Through the glass, Victoria's eyes met hers. Cold, calculating, seeing only a threat to be eliminated. Behind her, Alex stood straighter, their father's determination in his stance. Rachel checked her watch. 2 minutes to make a decision that would affect thousands of lives, including Maria's, including her own. The stairwell door stood to her left. The boardroom waited ahead. And somewhere, she knew, Ruth Campbell and Theodore Whitfield were watching their daughter face the moment that would define not just her future, but their legacy. What would you choose? Walking straight into a battle you might lose, or taking a risky detour that could change everything? Share your thoughts below on when to trust your instincts. Rachel turned left. The east stairwell was empty except for an elderly woman sitting on the steps, her gray hair pulled back severely, her hands clutching a worn leather portfolio. She looked up as Rachel entered, and something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or regret. "Margaret Chen," she said, standing slowly. "I was James Harrison's assistant for 30 years. And before that, I worked alongside your mother." Rachel's legal training kicked in, noting details. Expensive shoes worn down at the heels, designer bag at least a decade old, hands that trembled slightly but held the portfolio with fierce determination. 1 minute until the meeting, Rachel said quietly. "Make it count." Margaret opened the portfolio. "Theodore Whitfield didn't fire your mother. She left because James Harrison threatened to destroy them both." She pulled out a stack of photographs. Harrison was embezzling through shell companies. Your mother discovered it while cleaning his office late one night. When she told Theodore, he began investigating quietly. But Harrison found out. Rachel's hands shook as she took the photos, documents, bank statements, all dated from the year before her birth. Why didn't father expose him? Harrison threatened to reveal your mother's pregnancy, to claim she'd stolen from the company. In 1989, who would believe a black maid over a wealthy white executive? Theodore chose to protect her, and you, by letting her leave with a severance package that looked like hush money. Harrison kept his position, but Theodore never trusted him again. The boardroom door was visible through the stairwell window. Victoria was calling the meeting to order. Harrison's been embezzling ever since, Margaret continued, her voice hardening. I've documented everything. Last week, when he heard about your inheritance, he dug up the old lies. But I have proof of the truth. Your mother was a hero, Rachel. And your father. He made the only choice he could to protect you both. Rachel stared at the evidence in her hands, her mother's vindication, Harrison's crimes, and something else, a deeper understanding of Theodore Whitfield's complexity. Why now? She asked Margaret. Why help me? Because I watched Ruth Campbell choose dignity over vengeance. I watched Theodore Whitfield choose silence over justice. Now I'm watching their daughter inherit the power to make different choices. Margaret straightened her shoulders. It's time for the truth to come home. Rachel's phone buzzed. Alex, where are you? Victoria's starting. She looked at Margaret. Will you testify to all of this? I've spent 30 years preparing for this moment. Margaret's smile was fierce. Make it count. Rachel burst through the boardroom doors at exactly 11:03 a.m., Margaret Chen behind her. Victoria Whitfield stopped mid-sentence, her perfectly composed facade cracking slightly at the sight of Harrison's assistant. I apologize for my tardiness, Rachel said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. I was just learning some fascinating history about Whitfield and Associates. Specifically, about the real reason Ruth Campbell left her position here in 1989. James Harrison stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. This meeting is about the CEO position, not ancient history. Actually, Alex said, right on cue, it's about the future of this company. And the future is built on truth. Rachel laid the evidence on the table. Mr. Harrison, would you like to explain these documents? Or shall I ask Ms. Chen to do it for you? The next 30 minutes changed everything. Margaret Chen's testimony, delivered with decades of pent-up precision. Harrison's collapse under the weight of truth. Victoria Whitfield's slow realization that she had allied herself with the wrong side of history. But it was the final document that silenced the room completely, a letter from Theodore Whitfield to the board, dated 3 days before his death. My daughter Rachel represents everything this company should have been. Integrity, justice, and the courage to fight for what's right. I chose silence once to protect her. She will choose truth to protect others. That's why she, not Victoria's allies, must lead Whitfield and Associates into the future. My final instruction as founder, let my daughter bring our company home to its conscience. Rachel stood at the head of the table, feeling the weight of both her names, Campbell and Whitfield, settling into perfect balance. I have 2 proposals for this board, she said clearly. First, we implement comprehensive reforms for all building maintenance staff, starting with the Morrison case properties. Second, we create an ethics oversight committee, chaired jointly by worker representatives and board members. She met Victoria's eyes. You can fight me on this and lose everything when I take it public, or you can help me transform this company into something my mother and father would both be proud of. The room held its breath. Victoria Whitfield, Theodore's first wife, the woman who had lost him to a moment of real love with Ruth Campbell, stood slowly. Your father, she said quietly, spent 35 years trying to deserve his daughter. Perhaps it's time for this company to do the same. One by one, the board members nodded. Alex's smile was brighter than the morning sun streaming through the windows. And somewhere, Rachel thought she could feel her mother's dignity and her father's determination flowing through her veins like a blessing. The time for secrets was over. The time for justice had come home. 3 months later, Rachel stood in the gleaming lobby of Whitfield Tower, watching as workers installed a new bronze plaque. The morning sun caught the engraved words, the Ruth Campbell Worker Education Center, where dignity meets opportunity. Maria Suarez stood beside her, no longer in a cleaner's uniform but wearing the sharp blazer of her new position, head of worker relations and board representative. "Sometimes," she said softly, "justice does find its way home." The Morrison case had been settled within days of Rachel's board meeting triumph. But the settlement wasn't just about money, it was about transformation. Every building maintenance worker in Whitfield Properties now had health insurance, educational benefits, and a living wage. The Ruth Campbell Center would provide free job training, ESL classes, and childcare. "Ms. Campbell Whitfield?" Sophia appeared with an urgent expression. "They're ready for you upstairs. The Ethics Committee is reviewing the Harrison audit, and Alex is on video conference from his research station." Rachel squeezed Maria's hand and headed for the elevator. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of change. James Harrison faced criminal charges for decades of embezzlement. Victoria Whitfield had surprised everyone by becoming one of Rachel's strongest allies in modernizing the company. And Margaret Chen had been promoted to Chief Compliance Officer, her 30 years of secret documentation forming the backbone of Whitfield and Associates' new transparency initiatives. The boardroom, her boardroom now, was full when she arrived. Alex's face filled one wall screen, the Pacific Ocean visible behind him. Victoria sat near the head of the table, her elegance now softened by something like wisdom. Margaret Chen had the seat of honor beside her. "The final numbers from the Harrison audit," Margaret began without preamble, "show nearly $300 million in misappropriated funds over 30 years. Following your instructions, Rachel, we've traced every penny." Rachel nodded. "And the repayment plan?" "The first wire transfers went out this morning," Victoria reported. "Full restitution to every maintenance worker account Harrison skimmed from. With interest." Alex's voice came through the speakers. "The environmental impact studies are done too, sis. Those coral reefs we discussed? The Whitfield Foundation's restoration project is ready to launch." Rachel felt a familiar warmth in her chest, the same feeling she'd had 3 months ago, standing in St. Michael's Cemetery with Alex, making plans to honor all their family's legacy, even the parts that lived only in memory. "There's something else," Sophia said quietly, stepping forward. "The St. Michael's board approved your proposal. The Theodore Campbell Jr. Memorial Scholarship will provide full college funding for children of maintenance workers, starting this fall." Rachel blinked back tears, thinking of her twin brother's small grave, now surrounded by fresh gardens and a new bench where workers could rest between shifts. Her mother had taught her that healing happened in circles, not lines. The proof was all around her. "One last item," Victoria said, surprising Rachel by standing. "The board has unanimously approved the company's official name change." She gestured to a document on the table. "Whitfield Campbell Industries. Because some legacies deserve equal billing." Rachel picked up the document with trembling hands. Below the new letterhead was a mission statement she and Alex had written together, building futures on foundations of dignity, integrity, and justice. "There's someone else who should see this," she said suddenly. "Alex, can you hold the video call for 30 minutes? The private elevator took her to the basement level she discovered in Theodore's papers, a secret archive of Whitfield history. But she wasn't interested in the corporate records today. Instead, she made her way to a small room in the back, where 2 portraits now hung side by side. Ruth Campbell's photograph showed her in profile, laughing in that long-ago kitchen, her uniform crisp, her dignity radiating through time. Beside it, Theodore Whitfield's official portrait had been replaced with a candid shot Rachel had found in the storage unit. Her father in an unguarded moment, watching someone off camera with an expression of pure love. "We did it," she whispered to both images. "We brought it all home." Her phone buzzed, a text from David. "Turn on the news. Now." Racing back upstairs, Rachel found the boardroom erupting in applause. On every screen, headlines scrolled. "Whitfield Campbell Industries sets new standard for corporate responsibility. Billionaire's daughter transforms father's company into worker justice model. Wall Street stunned as ethics meets profit. The Rachel Campbell Whitfield revolution." But it was the smallest headline, in the corner of one screen, that brought tears to her eyes. "Ruth Campbell's legacy, from maid to corporate legend, a story of American transformation. Alex's voice came through clearly despite the ocean between them. Mother would be proud, sis. Both our mothers. Rachel touched the new company letterhead, tracing both her names, the one she'd been given at birth and the one she'd inherited through truth. Outside the boardroom windows, Manhattan stretched toward the horizon, its buildings full of workers like her mother, dreamers like her father, fighters like herself. You know what this means, Victoria said softly. You've changed everything. Other companies will have to follow. The ripples will go on and on. Rachel smiled, thinking of coral reefs and circles of healing, and the long way justice sometimes had to travel to find its way home. Good, she said simply. That's exactly what we're here for. What legacy would you want to leave behind? Share your thoughts below on how one person's choices can ripple through generations. 1 year to the day after Rachel first walked into Harrison Blackstone's office to learn of her inheritance, she stood in the garden of St. Michael's Cemetery, surrounded by family both chosen and blood. The morning sun painted everything in gentle gold, catching the new granite bench that bore 2 names, Theodore Campbell Jr. and Ruth Campbell, together at last. Alex adjusted his tie, still uncomfortable and formal where despite a year of board meetings, and handed Rachel a gardenia. Mother's favorite, he said softly, and they both knew which mother he meant. David Martinez stood nearby with Maria Suarez, both holding reports from the latest Whitfield Campbell Industries Worker Satisfaction Survey. 98% approval rating. Unprecedented in corporate America. Victoria Whitfield, elegantly subdued in gray, placed her own flower beside Rachel's. Theodore would be proud, she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of a woman who had learned to see beyond old wounds. Of all of us. The gathering wasn't large. Margaret Chen, Sophia, a few key board members, and most importantly, the first recipients of the Theodore Campbell Jr. Memorial Scholarship. 20 children of maintenance workers, their futures now as bright as the morning sun, their parents standing tall with newfound dignity. Rachel stepped forward, her hand touching the cool granite as she had so many times this past year. But today was different. Today was about completion. A year ago, she began, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet garden, I learned that legacy isn't just what we inherit, it's what we choose to do with that inheritance. My mother, Ruth Campbell, chose dignity over bitterness. My father, Theodore Whitfield, chose protection over pride. My brother, Theodore Jr., though he never drew breath, chose to be a bridge between 2 worlds through the scholarship that bears his name. She paused, looking at the faces around her. Alex's gentle strength, Victoria's hard-won grace, Maria's fierce determination, all reflecting pieces of the truth she discovered. But the most important choice was made by thousands of people who decided to believe in transformation. The maintenance workers who trusted us to make real change. The board members who chose ethics over easy profit. The students standing here today, ready to build futures their parents could only dream of. Rachel reached into her jacket and withdrew an envelope, her mother's final letter to Theodore, the one that had started everything. Today, we're not just remembering the past. We're celebrating what happens when secrets turn into truth, when power meets purpose, and when justice finally finds its way home. She opened the envelope one last time, but now its words weren't just hers, they belonged to everyone whose lives had been touched by the changes of the past year. Every worker receiving fair wages, every child going to college, every corporate policy now built on human dignity. My mother wrote that sometimes love takes the long way home, Rachel continued. She was right. But what matters isn't how long the journey takes, it's what we build along the way. Alex stepped forward, placing his hand next to hers on the bench. Victoria joined them, then Maria, then others, until the morning sun caught a circle of hands united in purpose. The scholarship students raised their acceptance letters like beacons. Somewhere in the city, maintenance workers were entering the Ruth Campbell Center for morning classes. In the Pacific, Alex's team was preparing to plant new coral beds funded by the Whitfield Foundation. And in boardrooms across America, executives were studying the Whitfield Campbell model of ethical corporate transformation. So this, Rachel said softly, is what coming home feels like. Later, as the gathering dispersed, she stood alone for a moment between her brother's grave and her mother's. The gardenia petals trembled in a gentle breeze, their fragrance a reminder of all the beauty that could grow from truth. Her phone buzzed, another company requesting consultation on worker justice initiatives. The ripples were still spreading, just as Victoria had predicted. But now Rachel had something she hadn't had a year ago, the perfect balance of Campbell determination and Whitfield influence, of her mother's heart and her father's vision. Alex waited by the cemetery gate, his research gear packed for his return to the Pacific. Ready to change more worlds, sis? Rachel smiled, touching the bench one last time. She thought of Ruth Campbell cleaning offices at midnight, of Theodore Whitfield watching his daughter from afar, of a baby brother who had somehow united them all. Every choice, every secret, every twist of fate had led to this moment. Yes, she said simply. I'm ready. Because legacy, she had learned, wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. And somewhere beyond judgment, beyond time, beyond the long road home, Ruth Campbell and Theodore Whitfield were watching their daughter build bridges between all the worlds they'd given her. Justice had found its way home. And love, in all its imperfect glory, had finally completed its circle.